So good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it is afternoon. You'll notice that I put this on to record for those of you who just joined. What I want to do is preface this with the fact that this information is really only accurate for the next academic year. So August 2023 to August 2024. Schools often change their criteria and eligibility, and so this video will be only available for a limited time. My name is Catherine Stewart. For those of you who don't know me, I see lots of familiar names. I'm work on the career team in the Science, Career and Co-op Education Office. We offer career services for everybody in their professional future, and as I'm for the Faculty of Science. And we decided we'd open this up to other faculties. And we have quite a number of other faculties joining us today. But one of the most common conversations that we have in our offices is around medical school. So who better than to bring in some admissions people from medical schools to give you that firsthand information? And it's an opportunity for us to learn as well, because we need to always update ourselves to make sure we're accurately informing students. So this is one of our most frequently asked questions. So, and I just wanted to let you know that today we have mostly health sciences students, about 69% health sciences students. The next big chunk is science. We've got some arts and science, commerce and humanities. We've got everyone in from level 0. So you haven't even been to a class at McMaster. So yay, you're really thinking ahead, up to people who are doing their PhD and alumni who have graduated with their undergraduate degree. So we've got a real breadth of people here. So I really welcome that. As I mentioned in the note I sent out to you, because there's so many people, we're going to my colleagues Benuri and Hannah are going to keep track of the chat. I will try to answer anything that I know definitively as we go, or Hannah can as well. And then we'll tackle the questions at the end. So also, for those of you coming back to campus for Welcome Week, check out Oscar Plus, our events page. We're having quite a number of events, as well as things that we've got scheduled in the fall. Anyway, I don't want to put Wendy on hold any longer. So Wendy Edge is admissions officer in the Michael G. DeGroot School of Medicine here at McMaster. And I sat in on a session that Wendy did last August, and it was so very helpful and informative. And I thought, you know what, we should do this again for students. So without further ado, thank you, Wendy, so much for taking the time to do this. I'm going to mute myself so that you can take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine, for the invite and for the intro, and welcome everyone who has come here. I'm going to, I have a presentation prepared that's going to go through the requirements and how we select students, et cetera, et cetera. And then, as Catherine mentioned, there will be time for questions at the end. So bear with me for a moment while I share my screen, because for some reason, even though I do this very frequently, I still seem to struggle every single time. So give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, can somebody confirm that they can see and hear me?
We can see and hear you, but not your slides.
Oh, you can't see the slides? Okay.
Not yet.
They are there. I can see them. Hang on 1 second. Let's try this again, sorry.
There we go. We can see them now, Wendy.
Okay, thank you. I'll just put it on there. Can you still see them?
Yeah, it's just in small version, though. It's not in the present slide mode.
Okay. Great. It's being difficult here. Sorry, Catherine, I can't seem to change it. escape it again.
As I said, today has been a very strange day technologically for
It
all
really
of us.
has.
And we almost decided we'd go home at 9 o'clock because it was just that strange. So the curse continues, and I'm sorry to envelop you in our curse as well.
Can you see it now?
Again, it's the slide deck. It's the slide deck that's sitting on your desktop.
Okay. Sorry, guys, I'm not really sure how to.
So maybe instead of sharing screen, share specifically the presentation that you can see. That's one idea. So when you press share screen, you see, oh, I don't remember. I can't do that or else it'll stop.
Sorry, everybody. I'm not sure why this isn't sharing on my end, but.
Because it was before.
I know.
I think you can share either the screen or the window. So just make sure it's the screen and not the window is my only thought.
Thanks, Hannah.
Now? No?
Yes, we're there.
Okay. Well, I'm really sorry about that, everybody.
No,
I don't know what it is
need.
about this, but I share screen and meetings constantly. And whenever it's a presentation, I seem to fiddle around and can't get where I want to be. So I really apologize for that.
We share and appreciate your pain. So now we're good.
Okay, sorry, everyone. So as Catherine mentioned, my name is Wendy Edge, and I am actually currently have a title change, Manager of Admissions and Enrollment for Medicine at McMaster. And I've been doing this for quite a few years and have been at McMaster longer than I probably care to admit, because I'm sure it's probably long before most of the people in this audience were born. So I'm not going to give the year. But suffice to say that I have been a lifer at McMaster, and admissions is my passion for sure. So thank you to the Science, Career and Cooperative Education group for inviting me to this. I'm always glad when I see people come to the source as opposed to chat sites. Pre-Med 101 is probably the bane of my existence. Not the best place to get information, but I understand when people want information, they go to wherever they think they can find it. So I'm happy to see people here for it. So a little bit about McMaster and what makes us different. Many of you, because you're McMaster students, will already know this, but I will go through it anyway. The main and biggest reason is probably our 3-year program. So only McMaster and the University of Calgary in Canada are 3-year programs. But what this means is that you're not off between April and September as you would be in a 4-year program or in your undergraduate program. And that's something that should come into your decision-making if you're fortunate enough to have more than one offer of admission. I think for some people, that's the very reason they choose us. And for some people, that's the very reason that they don't. Particularly if this isn't home, and home is on the west or east coast, for example, you're not home for the summer to visit with family. So that's one of the reasons that I think people are bothered by that, and also just having a slower pace and that time off in the summer, potentially to work or travel, whatever else you'd like to do. But as I say, it is also one of the reasons that many students choose us. They would rather get into medicine, get moving along, and finish more quickly. So this means as well that our classes start very early. So our incoming class of 2026 started last Monday on the 8th of August. They will receive 2 weeks off in December, right around the Christmas break, a week off in March in their first and second year, 2 weeks off in the summer, that's in all years, and they graduate in May of their 3rd year. So it's very quick, as you can imagine. Sometimes at graduation, there are people walking across the stage that I feel like I just registered them a minute ago. And it's not as quick as that, but it is a quick way through medicine. Keep that in mind. The other really big difference between McMaster and most schools is the style of learning. So McMaster somewhat was the beginnings of problem-based learning. You will will find that problem-based learning is available in a lot of undergraduate programs, particularly Bachelor of Health Science at McMaster and at other schools. If you're in a program that doesn't follow that way of teaching, but you have the opportunity to take an elective, for example, in a PBL course, it's not a bad idea to do that so that you can get a taste for what that style of learning is like. I think it's excellent myself, but it may not be everyone's best style of learning. So if you have the opportunity to take an elective in a PBL course, it's a good idea to do that if you're thinking of applying to McMaster. So the main teaching sessions are in small group tutorials. We do have lectures, we call them large group sessions, but that's not the main focus of teaching. So in your undergrad program, you may find you spend the majority of your time in lectures where, you know, a professor is speaking and you're madly typing or writing. There's very little of that. It augments the small group, but the small group is the main way that we teach. It's also very self-directed. So while there is a lot of things that are mandatory, there are a lot that are not mandatory. So there will be parts of the program that you will actually decide whether or not you wish to attend. So there is a lot of flexibility there. I think that's another draw for a lot of students. Also something that makes some students nervous. I'll also talk in a minute about our 3 campuses. When we first started giving this presentation, having multiple campuses was sort of a new thing. And now I'm pretty sure that all schools have multiple campuses. So it's one of the ways that the government has thought to try and address issues around shortage of physicians in certain areas. There's a lot of research that shows that if you train in a certain area, the chances that you may fall in love with the area and stay there to practice are high. So that's one of the reasons that they have gone with multiple campuses and resource-wise. So, you know, if we have all of our students here in Hamilton, we're really sort of drowning our teachers, whereas if we can spread them out over 3 campuses, the learning experiences are a lot better. The 3 campuses are Hamilton, where I am sitting today, and many of you may be as well. The Waterloo campus, which is in Kitchener on the University of Waterloo Health Science campus, shared with a building shared with the the School of Pharmacy, and many of the facilities shared between the 2. That was actually a really amazing thing because pharmacy had a lot of money to spend on certain features which the med students have had the benefit of. So that's been a great partnership. And the Niagara Regional Campus is in St. Catharines, and it's on Brock University property. So the students at the 2 regional campuses have all benefits that McMaster students have, and in addition, they have benefits that the University of Waterloo or Brock University students have. So they have access, for example, to their student health services and their gym, etc., while still having those things available to them in Hamilton. We currently are admitting 153 students to the Hamilton campus and 32 each to Waterloo and Niagara. And that just went up about, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks ago when Doug Ford announced additional positions. So our class was full and all set, and suddenly we were making additional offers at the last minute when those numbers went up. So going forward, as far as I'm aware, we will stick with these new numbers, which is 217 students in total, and the addition of 3 MD PhD students who are admitted in a different way. And I will speak briefly about MD PhD, but I won't get too into it. And if anyone has questions about that program in particular, they can reach out to me afterwards, as I think it tends not to be of interest to the majority of the group. What we do about campus selection is that for those who are invited for interview, we poll them approximately a week to 2 weeks after their interview and ask them to rank their preferences. There's no guarantee of campus unless you rank in the top 1/5 of our rank order list. So the top 1/5 automatically receives their first choice of campus. The 2nd, 5th has 1 ticket in the basket, so to speak. The 3rd, 5th, 2 tickets, and so on. So if you're being drawn from the basket, there isn't actually a basket, but if you're being drawn, you're actually being drawn to receive your 2nd choice of campus. And there is no switching of campuses, so you will receive only 1 offer, and your options are to accept it or decline it. As I mentioned before, you will find that most medical schools, if not all medical schools, do have regional campuses now. It's done a little differently in some than others. So in the early days, we had our students all start in Hamilton for Medical Foundation 1. But now that we're much more established in our regional campuses, we don't do that. You start immediately in your campus. One of the complications with having everyone start in Hamilton, even though the idea of it was good to be part of the bigger class, was that it often meant people had to move twice. And from a financial perspective and logistical perspective, that wasn't a great idea. The minimum academic requirements to apply to McMaster are 3 or more years, which is 30 semester credits or 15 full year credits, or a combination of that, of undergraduate degree level courses complete by May of the year of entry. So what that means is that when you are applying in October, we're counting the number of credits you've completed plus those you've registered in, and it must equal at least 30 semester credits. These have to be taken at a Canadian or US university. If they are not, there is a different route. And again, because this is a McMaster group, I won't get into that. But if anyone does have questions about education done outside of Canada or the US, you can email me, and my email address will be at the end. You need to have a cumulative grade point average on all courses taken at the undergrad. So you will have a minimum of 20 courses when you apply, but some people will have 40 or even more, of a B or 75% on the OMSAS scale. If you're watching med school admissions at all, you will know that while a B is the minimum that we require in order to consider you, the chances of you receiving an offer of admission or advancing through to interview is quite slim. The level of competition is fierce, with about 5,800 people applying each year. So the higher your GPA, obviously, the higher you're going to be on that in that particular component. And I'll go through our whole formula as we get there. We also require the MCAT. We only use the critical analysis and reasoning section of the MCAT, which is the non-science section. I didn't mention, and I meant to just now, that we have no prerequisite courses. So while many of you may be in a science-based course, we do accept students from any academic background. So to then say you need the science components of the MCAT would not be particularly fair. So we only use the critical analysis and reasoning, and it's very much a critical thinking piece. You can go on the MCAT website if you haven't already, and there are sample questions there to give you a sense of what those are. There's a minimum score, like the GPA, there's a minimum score on the MCAT CARS section of 123. And again, it is a competition, so the higher the better, but that's the minimum. For the GPA, this is probably one of the most common questions we get, is sort of how to calculate the GPA. And I'll preface this by saying that I think one of the good things around medical school admissions in Canada is that not all schools do this the same. So if we did, we would literally all be admitting or certainly interviewing the same students. So if you are a student who is not sort of the straight A all the way along, there are schools that you will fare better in than others. So for McMaster, it's an overall simple average, a cumulative average, all courses taken at the undergrad level, all years treated equally. There's no prerequisite courses, but you also can't eliminate any of your grades. So that's great for students who have the very strong academic history. Those who maybe had a tough first year or anything like that might fare better, for example, at University of Ottawa. So what the University of Ottawa does is they use a weighted GPA, where it's year 1 grades times 1, year 2 grades times 2, year 3 grades times 3. So for that student, you might fare better. Other processes, I'm going to use U of T, I think, as an example. They have certain prerequisite courses plus your next best, whatever it is, 3 or 6. So there's a few different ways that these are calculated, which I think is a good thing, because it does open the field up for some of the students that don't have sort of the straight A average all along. The other thing we get asked a lot is about repeating courses. So for McMaster, if you retake a course, your course generally does appear on your transcript twice. If it doesn't, of course, if it's removed, we don't know it's there, it wouldn't be included. Normally it is. And we include both of them just as 2 separate courses in the scheme of things. So if there's 30 courses going into your GPA and 2 of them are the same course, but one is a D and one is an A, they are just treated as 2 individual courses. We also include summer and distance education courses, as long as they're taken at a Canadian or US university. So sometimes students are taking courses at, say, Athabasca. It may be to raise their grade. It may be to cover a prerequisite for a school that has prerequisites. Those are all part of our GPA calculation. So as long as they're undergrad courses on an undergrad transcript in Canada or US, they will be included in the GPA. So it's probably as simple of a process as it can be, but for some of you, it may not end up being the best process. But keep in mind, you can check out other schools in case you'll see that you might do better somewhere else. That's not to send you away from McMaster. It's just to let you know that there are options in case you're feeling like, uh-oh. Our other main requirement is called Casper, and I'm sure some of you are aware of what this is. It's done in many areas. It was also developed at McMaster, but it has been subbed out to a company that runs it for us called Acuity Assessments. Acuity Insights, sorry, they've changed their name again. So this is a situational judgment type of test where you sign up for a specific time. You do it at home or wherever you wish on your own computer. When you log in, you're looking at video vignettes and some non-videos where they're just scenarios, let's say, and you're answering questions around what it is you've either watched or what you've read. For the video vignettes, mainly what it is that there will be a situation that's unfolding between some people and something isn't going well about this interaction. So it's asking you questions around how would you handle this if you were, say, the person in charge, or if you were the person who felt they were being maligned, what would you do? And what would you have done differently than the person who was in charge? It's that sort of thing where they're trying to see how you would react to a situation that isn't ideal. The responses are time limited. So when you do a scenario and the questions appear, you have only 5 minutes to type your answers. We've had a lot of concern around that, sort of the good typist versus the poor typist, which I understand. The main reason for it, though, is to avoid the ability to get outside help, because what we're trying to do with any of these tools is to get who you are and not who ChatGPT is or who Google is or your parent or anyone else who might be helping you. So that is why the time limit is there. The assessors, however, are advised not to mark someone down because there are typographical errors, for example. They know that you're madly trying to get as much in as you can in your 5 minutes. They do need to know what you're trying to say. So be a little bit careful about too many short forms. I have been an assessor for this, and sometimes it's just beyond what you can actually understand. But as long as they can understand what you're trying to say, they're not going to mark you down for typographical errors. So don't get too concerned about that. The test itself takes between 100 and 120 minutes on the date that you're signed up for. And like MCAT, you can go on to the Casper website, which I've listed below, pardon me, and see some samples of what Casper scenarios look like, both the video and the typed scenarios. So you can sort of see that in advance. The other requirement also, I think, can cause some angst is the reference letters. So years ago, the reference letters were just a free form letter, and sometimes we would get 6 to 8 pages that talked more about the referee than they did the person that they were sending the reference for. So the Ontario Medical Schools got together and created more of a form so that we can try and keep these to a readable format and also keep them on track with what it is we're trying to find out. The referees are asked to comment on these attributes that are listed: communication skills, problem-solving skills, professionalism, which is huge in medicine, and you'll see that theme from every school. Empathy, areas of improvement needed, and any other information. So they've got just those boxes to complete. And we're asking them to sort of rank you in those areas and potentially give an example. At least one of your referees should be non-academic, so not someone who has taught you or evaluated you in an academic setting. So something personal. It could be an employer, it could be a volunteer coordinator, it could be someone from your community, from your church, anything along those lines. Do not use family or close friends or other students or applicants. Those references, if they're noticed, would be disregarded. Choose people who know you well and can speak to your attributes, but don't get too caught up on who they are or what their stature is. So we're not ranking who your referee is. We're not more impressed because your referee is the head of this or Dr. someone, for example. We want it to be relevant to whatever they are in your life, and we want them to be able to speak to you, speak about you in a way that is clear that they actually know you, and that this isn't just a choice because you're hoping that the admissions committee might be impressed by it. So keep that in mind. The people that, if you've had a rocky relationship, for example, with a grad supervisor, this is something we see from time to time, that might not be your best choice of reference. So think about your interactions with your referees, and if any referee were to say, I'm not too comfortable being a referee, then you should probably move on from that, because that may be an indicator that they don't feel that they can give you a strong reference. So the application is, I don't know if anyone on the line is a current applicant, you may be. It opened, I think it was July the 9th that it opened this year. And this is for entry in August 2024. They're all, for all Ontario Medical School, the application is done on the Ontario Medical School Application Service website. And OMSAS is part of UAC, who you would have used when you applied for your undergrad. So it's just a division for medical school. The deadline is October 1st. This year, I believe October 1st is on a weekend, so it's bumped to the Monday. I never change it on my presentation, lest it go somewhere far, far away. And 3 years from now, someone thinks the application deadline is the 2nd or the 3rd because it was changed in that year. So I leave it on the 1st, even though it does bump to the Monday if the 1st is a holiday, is a weekend. Do not leave your application submission to the last minute. I think October the 2nd is my least favorite day of the year every year, because without fail, there are a handful of people who were just doing one last read through, missed the deadline because their clock was incorrect or something happened to their internet, or you name it, there's any number of things. And it's an electronic application, so it closes at 4:30. Very, very disappointing to spend your whole summer working on your application only to be shut out at the last minute. And I think it's quite unlikely that there's anything you're going to add to your application in the last couple of hours that's going to meaningfully change anything. So do yourself a huge favor and avoid that drama, and submit, the day before, or at least the morning of. And that way, if something happens, suddenly your internet dies, you've got a little bit of time to react, because it is very, very distressing if you miss out. And as I say, that is my least favorite day of the year, because I've had applicants in tears and even their parents. So it's no fun at all for anyone. So moving on to the selection process. Our first process, of course, is invitation to interview. So in reality, this is the hardest part. So this is where you're trying to get from the over 5,000 applicants to the 600 or so interviewees. It is based on a formula. So assuming that you met that original criteria that I mentioned, 30 half-year or 15 full-year courses, or a combination by May of the year of entry, that your average is at least a 3.0 on the 4.0 scale, your MCAT CARS is at least 123, and you've written CASPER, then you will be ranked along with all of the other applicants. The formula that we use for invitation to interview is undergraduate GPA at 32%, MCAT CARS at 32%, CASPER score at 32%, and up to 4% for a graduate degree. It's 1% for a master's and 4% for a PhD. We do Z scoring, so these you can't sort of think, oh, I have X percent and that's how much it will be in the percentage, because it is Z scoring, but that gives you a sense of how we break it down. So we equally weight grade point average, MCAT CARS, and CASPER scores. This year we had 5,330 applications, which was down a little from last year, and we interviewed 600 people. I'll mention that we do use geographical status. By that, I mean that we award 90% of the interviews to Ontario residents and 10% to all others. Likely everyone on this call is considered an Ontario resident in our process. And what we consider an Ontario resident is any student who has lived in the province of Ontario for at least 3 years by the time of potential entry, and that includes attending university in Ontario. So if you are a McMaster student and have done expect to do your 3 years at McMaster, even if BC, for example, is home, we still consider you an Ontario resident. So we're quite generous in that definition. The interview process, which follows for the 600 students who ranked in the top 600, is called the multiple mini interview. This as well was created at McMaster University. So we have done a lot of very exciting and innovating things over the years, and you will come across the MMI at many schools if you are applying to multiple schools. It has been adopted by quite a number of the medical schools across Canada, not all, and in the US and internationally. So it is a fairly well-known process now. It consists of 8 10-minute encounters with an individual interviewer in a circuit, plus 2 break stations. These are held virtually now since COVID. As far as I'm aware, I expect that we will continue to offer these virtually. Even though after the first couple of years, there was talk amongst all the schools about whether they would go back to in-person. I think from the perspective of the applicants, many of whom are flying across the country to try and attend multiple interviews, sometimes on the same day, it isn't really reasonable. So as much as we've had a hard time, I think, with a lot of our assessors getting to the point where we're equally comfortable with virtual as we were with in-person, I suspect it's here to stay, but stay tuned. Anything can change, but I imagine it's here to stay. So what happens with the multiple mini interview is basically you are, if it was in person, entering a room, but virtually you're entering a virtual room. You're outside the room for 2 minutes where you're reading a station or a question, and you have 2 minutes to think about what you're going to answer or how you're going to discuss it. When you get moved into the room with the assessor, you will discuss that scenario or station with them. And in addition, they have extra questions they can ask you. So you don't have to worry about filling the entire time. So it's 2 minutes outside the room, 8 minutes inside the room. You don't need an 8-minute speech prepared. You need to start talking about your position on the question, and they will have additional questions to prompt should there be a lag in the conversation. The questions are predetermined, and they're in domains that we and other schools have deemed important for students coming into medicine. One of the reasons for the predetermined questions is that in the bad old days, when interviews were just behind a closed door with a panel, we couldn't sort of guarantee any consistency in how students were being interviewed, whether questions were being asked that are not appropriate to be asked, and that sort of thing. So this was one of the ways to make some fairness across the board. All students interviewed on one day are asked the exact same questions. So we can feel a bit more confident that the interviews are fair across the board and that they're fairly standardized. The questions are, or stations are, in these 5 topics: critical thinking, I think everyone knows what that is, ethical decision making, and you will see this coming up over and over and over again in medical school interviews or essays or anything you're required to do. And that's mainly because students who do get into difficulties in med school, it's not usually due to academics. And if it is due to academics, we have lots and lots of things that can assist those students to get up to where they need to be. When it's around ethical decision making, it's much more difficult. And this is where students and physicians down the road find themselves getting into hot water. So in a way, I think all the schools are attempting to find the means to identify strong ethical decision-making skills at the admissions level, in the hopes that those are not the students without that are not the students that come into the program and ultimately run into difficulties with professionalism or down the road when they're physicians. So you will see that that's a really big factor in admissions for medicine. Communication skills is when you are, in our situation anyway, you are speaking with an actor. So they're called standardized patients, although they're not patients, but we have an actor in the room that you will be interacting with. So you're still outside the room for 2 minutes reading whatever the scenario is, but you're discussing it with someone, and the assessor is just observing this discussion and ranking accordingly. So it's a little different than the other stations when you're interacting directly with the assessor. Knowledge of the healthcare system is not knowledge of medicine, but it is knowledge or science, but it's knowledge of the field you're hoping to enter. So questions in that area might surround doctor shortages, for example, or autonomy in patients, but not specifics that you would learn in medicine. Just if you're applying to go into medical school, there's a hope that you've researched it enough to have a good understanding of what it is you're actually trying to attend. And then personal interview is sort of exactly as it sounds, sort of the why medicine, what other things have you thought of, why McMaster in particular, what things do you think will be the most difficult for you in medicine? It's that sort of question that you would anticipate getting in any sort of interview. So the selection process. So assuming you've come to interview, we now have scores from each of your stations from your MMI. So each of those assessors that were in those rooms have given you an independent score. What used to happen in the panel interviews is that most often we would have a faculty, a community, and a student involved. The faculty may have more pull in terms of what the final score would be. In this process, all of those interviewers are separate from each other. And so one cannot be swayed by another assessor in terms of how they felt that student did. It also means that if you have a station where you don't do well, and that can happen, sometimes it's your first station because you're very nervous, you may get a low score for that particular station. But if you're able to gather your thoughts and move on and you do well in the rest of them, that one station is unlikely to hold you back because it's very independent from the other. So that's another reason why the multiple mini interview. So following the interview, those scores are put into our second formula, but they're now, the interview scores are at 70%. So there's a lot of weighting on the interview. Your GPA and your MCAT cars go back in, but at 15% only. So in a lot of ways, we've already looked after the academic side of it, but it does come back in at a much smaller level. And that gives us our rank order for our 217 positions, and offers go out accordingly. In Ontario, all offers go out on the second Tuesday in May. Across the country, they aren't the exact same day, but they're very close, with the exception of Dalhousie. So Dalhousie does a much earlier process, and they make offers, I think it's November or December, but all the other schools are in and around mid-May. The good thing about that is that students who have interviewed across the country will have a pretty good idea all within the same week of any offers they'll get. So they'll be able to have a bit of time to consider all the offers and all the reasons why you will or won't accept a certain offer. If we could get everyone on the same week, we would, and we're close, but we haven't quite done that. So, but it's a big improvement from what it was many years ago. Well, I'll briefly mention the MD PhD program, and again, I won't go into much detail with this. If it is something that anyone is particularly concerned with, I can put you in touch with either an MD PhD student currently, or any questions that I can answer, I will answer. So this, of course, is a combined degree program that leads to both Doctor of Medicine and Doctor of Philosophy degree. It's 7 years, and basically the way that we have designed it is that students are admitted and do their first year of PhD first. So this gets them into their PhD work and into their project. They leave their PhD and come and do what is year 1 medicine, which is medical foundations 1 to 4 in their second year. Then they return to PhD and complete their PhD. It's usually 3 years, but we have seen it extended, and then come back and do the final year and a half of medical school, which is your clerkship rotation. So you're moving in between the two. And while you're in your PhD, you do have the opportunity to do clinical electives to keep your hand in the clinical side of medicine. This, of course, prepares you for a career as a clinician scientist. So many of our graduates are doing both clinical work and scientific work in their careers going on. The applicants to MD PhD apply in the exact same way for the MD side of things, but in addition, they apply through SLATE, which is part of Mosaic, I believe, by November 1st for the PhD component. Those applicants are reviewed in a separate stream by grad studies, who determines who will be invited for interview. It's an MMI, but it is done at a separate time. So those interviews and offers go out first. If you apply to both, if you apply to the MD program and the MD PhD program, you can still be considered for MD only if you are not successful in getting an MD PhD offer. And you will know that before the MD interviews take place. Now I'm starting to sound confusing. So feel free to ask me questions on that through email or after if you need it. There are multiple options for the PhD: biochemistry, biomedical engineering, chemical biology, health policy, health research methodology, and medical sciences and neurosciences. So if you are admitted to MD PhD, grad studies will assist you in gaining a supervisor in your area of that you wish to go into. New last year, across Ontario, we introduced the ability to request consideration in the admissions process for disability. This only relates to the GPA. So the scenario that is probably would explain this the easiest is that a student attends their undergraduate program and they're struggling, let's say, and in third year, they are diagnosed with a disability that wasn't known prior to that. They can request consideration with the appropriate documentation, which might result in the GPA only being calculated from the time that accommodations were applied. So that's a simple scenario. There are more complicated scenarios than that, of course. But basically, it does, you can't sort of go back in time and change what's already taken place, whereas accommodation can be sought for both the MCAT and CASPER at the time that you're taking it. So we're not looking at those two pieces. It's just the GPA, and it's only for disability. So at this time, it is not for circumstances. So something happened during your second year that caused you to take a leave or to do poorly. We're not looking at that. Your own school should have an accommodation process for those circumstances. This is strictly disability. So there is an application form that you complete as part of the application on OMSAS, which asks, I think it's 5 questions or so, and indicates what documentation you need to provide in order to have that considered. And that's Ontario-wide. So if you are applying to multiple schools in Ontario and you put in a request for disability consideration, that will be considered by all of the schools that you apply to. We do have a facilitated admission process for Indigenous applicants. This requires as well an additional application that is done through the Indigenous Learning Lodge. So students apply in the exact same way for the MD program and put in a separate application through the Indigenous Learning Lodge. Basically, all Indigenous applicants must meet the minimum requirements. So that's the GPA of 3.0, the MCAT CARS of 123, and CASPER. And you'll note we don't give a CASPER score because you don't actually get your score. Indigenous Task Force will review those applications, and they will give us a list of applicants that they are confirming should be considered in the facilitated process for Indigenous students. And basically the facilitation is mainly that those students are looked at and ranked separately from the remainder of the applicant pool, as long as they've met the minimum requirements and as long as the task force has approved them for consideration. Again, if there's anyone who has additional questions about that, I can answer them either later or on email. New last year, so I was going to say the Indigenous admission stream has been in place for many years, probably about 2002. But just last year, we introduced a Black Equity stream, which we call BEST. Similarly to the Indigenous stream, there is an additional application, which is, it's in the form of a letter that's basically talking about the student's background, and those are reviewed by the BEST community consultation group. Sorry, I was struggling with the name of that committee. And that group, similar to the Indigenous Task Force, will advise our office whether students should be considered through the Black Equity stream. Again, the students must meet all the minimum requirements, GPA, MCAT, CARS, and then those students are ranked in a separate application pool from the remainder of the students. We had a lot of success in the Black Equity Stream. I think we may be posting, I won't quote any numbers, but we may be posting something fairly soon on our website to demonstrate just how successful it was. So we're very excited about that. That comes to the end of my formal presentation. And I realize as I click there, I must have inadvertently removed one slide, which was basically the sort of start to finish of coming to med school or applying to med school. So I've done it enough times that I can just ream it off. So you're going to have the minimum of 2 years of undergraduate education before you apply, and a minimum of 3 before you enter the program. If you attend medical school in Ontario, at McMaster or University of Calgary, it is 3 years. Anywhere else in Canada is 4 years. In your final year of medical school, you'll apply for residency training. So that's where you're specializing in the field of medicine you wish to pursue. And residency training is between 2 and 6 years, depending on your specialty of choice, with 2 years being family medicine residency and 6 years are the surgical specialties. And there are some that are 4 or 5, such as pediatrics and radiology. At the end of your residency training, you will write college exit exams for whichever specialty it is that you have trained for. And then and only then will you get your license to practice medicine.
Great. Thanks so much, Wendy. That was very comprehensive, and I was trying to answer as many of the questions in the chat as I went along. So occasionally my ears, it was just
Yeah, no problem.
it was flying over my head. But as you know, as before, you're very, very clear. I love it that McMaster is not this black box, that you're very open about disclosing how you make. Yeah, I love the formulae. That just makes so much sense to me. So so we have I'm going to sort of curate some of the questions. I was looking at them, and so I thought I might sort of combine them. So I'm going to go back to the beginning a little bit. So we had a lot of questions about this 3rd year, 4th year, like things like, is there any advantage to being a 4th year versus a 3rd year? If you are 4th year and already have posted 3 years of marks, do they still look at your 4th year marks and give you a conditional offer? So just some clarification around that. I think I've captured most of the questions.
Yep. So when you're making your application, we're looking to make sure that you've met the minimum, which is 3 years by May of the year of entry. So we're counting what you've completed plus what you've finished. That just makes you eligible. When we're doing the GPA, we're actually using a cumulative average of all courses that you've taken. So for some students, it will be as few as 20, but for other students, it could be 80 if they've done 2 undergraduate degrees. There's no advantage or disadvantage to having more than the minimum education other than what it does to your GPA. So if, for example, you've taken a 2nd degree because you weren't happy with your marks in your 1st degree, it is a cumulative average. So one doesn't replace the other. So it would be an advantage to have the 2nd degree in that scenario, because hopefully it would raise your marks, assuming that you achieved better marks on your 2nd degree. But there's nothing in the background. So we aren't looking at students with the same GPA, and this one has 20 credits and this one has 30 and this one has 40. It's a numerical value that is applied to the formula. So as long as you've met the minimum, your GPA calculation could be based on as few as 20 or as many as, there's no limit, in fact.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I think that clarifies.
The other little piece. The other little piece you mentioned was conditional. So there is a conditional offer that is given to those who haven't met the 30 credits at the time of application. So if you're applying the soonest you can, which is as you're entering your 3rd year, if you're successful, we're not recalculating your GPA. We're still using that same GPA that got you to interview, but your offer would be conditional upon your 3rd year being complete and that your GPA didn't go below the minimum.
And here's another one that was related to that. Can somebody applying in third year apply to the MD PhD stream?
The MD PhD requires a 4-year honors degree.
Right.
And so no, I would say, I shouldn't say an absolute no. I may have seen one exception made way down the road, and that exception's by grad studies. So we look after the admissions process, but we don't make the decisions for the grad side. But they do advertise that they require a 4-year honors degree, and the GPA for the MD PhD applicant is calculated differently because they're looking at their final 2 years of undergrad, whereas we're looking at cumulative.
Right.
Just for that group.
So a question about international students. Where do we stand on that?
So we do admit international students. The only, no, I don't know how to, I don't even know what to call this. I should warn you that the tuition is very high. So I think that's, often the deterrent for international students, but it's currently $95,000 per year for an international student who's on a study visa. And really what that reflects is what the Canadian government pays in the units to the school plus what the Canadian students pay. So in fact, the school isn't actually making money from an international student in medicine, but they are also not losing money on an international student in medicine. The other sort of warning in a way is just simply that there's no guarantee after completing medical school in Canada, if you don't have Canadian citizenship or permanent resident, that you can stay for residency. So when an international student is admitted to medical school, the visa is only for those 3 years of medical school. There's no guarantees beyond that. Those are immigration laws.
Okay. So in terms of, you mentioned about the GPA calculation for North American students graduating from a North American institution with their undergrad. Is this too big a basket to ask you how other schools outside of North America might be managed?
Yeah, it's not too big a basket. We use World Education Services, so it's a pretty simple answer. So if you have done your undergraduate education outside of Canada or US, then you need a World Education Services assessment of that education, and we use their cumulative GPA as they calculate it.
Got you. All right, that's great. Thanks, Wendy. There was sorry, I'm just looking for there was a question about if I'm not mistaken, about ensuring no bias in the MMI interview process. Like is there, I mean, I'm not, the student didn't really talk about what kind of bias, but I mean, it could be anything, obviously, from, age, gender,
Yeah, it's something, it's something obviously we all struggle with and strive to do our best with. We do have a lot of training that all MMI assessors must attend annually. So even as someone who's been doing assessing for us for years still has to attend it annually. That's a huge question, and it's something that we are very concerned about all the time. When the assessors, they not only give a score, they give a comment. And we do have reviewers that read those comments to see if they can pick up anything in the comment that might signal that something has gone awry. But we do the pre-training, and we are hopefully as confident as we can be that our assessors are being as wonderful as we think they are, but we're not blind to the fact that it's an ongoing, continuous process.
Got you. Okay. And there was another question around, because you mentioned there were some different considerations: disability, indigeneity. What about LGBTQ plus? I apologize if that's not quite the right acronym, but is there any consideration around something like that as a maybe marginalized population?
Yeah. There is not at this time. And I'm not sure, there are other schools that are ahead of us in terms of some of the facilitated streams. So for example, students who live in rural areas might get more credit in a certain part of the process. Just as a frame of reference, it took 7 years to get the approvals for the best facilitated stream. It is not a simple thing to do, for sure.
Yeah.
And part of that is all of the levels of approval, wanting to be sure that what we're doing is the right thing to do. So we currently have only those things that I mentioned: the disability, the Indigenous, and the Black equity. So we do not have any other facilitation or consideration streams at this time. They're
Yeah.
always on the table. We are always talking about it.
Of course,
but those are the
I'm
only ones
sure
that
you
we have
are.
right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And so just to review that quickly, so each one of those categories of people are put into a separate stream for consideration. Is that right?
Yes, more or less. They must meet the minimum requirements, but then they're ranked separately. So in a separate cohort.
They're ranked separately.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Now, I had a couple of questions around, and I apologize if you said this. When the reference letters come into play and the autobiographical sketch, when did those things come into play? Is it before the interview, after the interview? I'm going to think it's before, but.
It's not, and I didn't say it. So for the sketch, which is just the kind of like a CV in a way, it's just a list of activities. There are some schools that actually rank or score it. We do not. We have used it a couple of times during interview. So the interviewer has your sketch, and that would be in the category of personal interview, where they could ask you about some of the activities you listed on the sketch, but we don't give it any kind of score or ranking. The references are looked at after interview, and only then for those who came to interview. So those are sent out to reviewers to read and to, it's mainly looking for red flags. So most reference letters, and Catherine, you probably know this, even if you've interviewed for staff, are glowing. I mean, you couldn't think of more nice things to say about the person. So the ones that catch attention are the ones that are not glowing, the ones that have a red flag. Those are the ones, so that the references go out to our reviewers, and then we have a meeting where those that have raised a concern are presented to the entire admissions committee and discussed as a group. So it's really more of a red flag process as it is, who had the nicest things to say, because it's not really something you can put into a score. And they're not scored at any point. They're just reviewed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Not
potentially the student could lose their spot in the rank order if there was something very egregious.
So the ABS and the references are not scored.
They're not scored.
What about the experience profile that comes from OUAC?
No, that really is the sketch. So as I said, there are some schools that do score it. We do not.
Yes,
We're looking at some different things. It won't be for this application cycle. It would be for next, around things like work experience, but we're pretty far away, I think, from having anything concrete that would come into a formula.
Right. Okay. That's great. That's something I didn't know too. So that's really helpful. Let me scroll down to, I think we covered, let's see. Boy, question about specialty, but that's really something that's chosen before residency. Yeah.
Yep. In your final year of medical school, you'll apply to residency training across the country, not necessarily where you do medical school, and you'll go to interviews, or probably virtually go to interviews, just as you will for medical school. So you're applying for positions in the fields that you're interested in. And then there's a rather complicated system where it's called the match, where the students ranks theirs and the applicant, or and they get matched.
Just one question, and I'm pretty sure. So asking about a fifth year, if you've done a fifth year to elevate your GPA, or for whatever reason, that is still everything is still included in that cumulative GPA. Is that right?
It's still included as long as you're still registered as an undergrad student and receiving an undergrad transcript. So you do have to be careful with that. At some schools, if you've graduated and then you come back and do an additional year, you're going to get a continuing education transcript, and that would not be included. But if you've remained registered as undergrad, or you attend another school or another program and you're registered as undergrad, then they would. So you do have to watch that a bit.
So in the Faculty of Science here at McMaster, students can become a continuing student. So they graduate. So that would apply to them, right?
Continuing student is different. So continuing students, I think, still get an undergraduate transcript. Is that correct?
Okay. Yeah. Yes, that's
I think
right.
they do. Yeah. But continuing ed does not. So there's all sorts of different levels. So it's the transcript that defines it. But I believe at McMaster, a continuing student is still considered undergraduate.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's very helpful. You gave tuition costs for international students. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Can you give me the tuition for a domestic student?
Yep. For this year, it was $26,193.
Very specific.
I know, because I do that. It hasn't gone up actually for 2 or 3 years. There's been a freeze on tuition. There is an out of province tuition, which is higher. That's a fairly new wrinkle. It's I think about $200 to $300 higher for out of province students, but we are working with the registrar's office to use the same definition of out of province for our admissions process and for tuition, because there was a bit of a disconnect between those two. Gotcha. So again, the majority of students on this call, assuming they are mostly McMaster students, would be eligible for the Ontario tuition.
Right. Gotcha. Just somebody mentioned that you had said, and I didn't hear this. So if you look at the final 2 years of undergraduate studies to calculate admissions GPA for the MD PhD, is that correct?
So the grad studies looks at the final 2 years GPA for the grad study side of it. We are still using a cumulative GPA for the MD side of it. So it's a little bit of a hybrid for MD PhD. And there's not a hugely significant number of applicants. So they do their piece and we do our piece, and then we combine the two and rank order the students. Okay, now I got it. Now I understand the question too, because I must have missed, that was one of the little pieces I missed. I know you mentioned the minimum for cars is 123. Also have a question around what is typical, and I think it's on the stats for the last 5 years, but I'll let you attach it. Yeah, it's usually between 128 and 129. A perfect score is 132, just to give you some, it's a very odd scoring scheme, because I think the lowest score is 118 and the highest score is 132. So 123 is a relatively low threshold, similar to a 3.0 being a relatively low threshold. Years ago, when we only had 2,000 applicants, it was much easier to potentially receive an interview if you were on the lower end of the GPA. But unfortunately, with the number of applicants we get and rising GPAs, it's not so simple anymore. Gotcha. Any red flags for a student who may have taken a break in the middle of their undergrad and then come back? Yeah, not for us, but that is a requirement for some schools. So for McMaster, we have no requirement that you carry a full course load, no requirement that your education has been done within the past 5 years or whatever some of them are. No prerequisite courses. We would not look poorly upon someone who took a break or anything like that. The downside to that, though, is it means that more students can qualify for McMaster. Some students that have done those things now don't qualify for some of the other schools. So it actually ends up sort of raising the bar a little. But no, we don't frown upon that in any way. In fact, we're admitting students into a 3-year program, which is pretty intense, and there aren't a lot of breaks. So we wouldn't discourage anyone from doing that, from pursuing something else for a period of time before they apply. It actually might even enhance your experience in med school. We don't put it into the admissions process, but just having that experience is not a bad thing. Right. Got you. And just general questions around course codes. So with a W or a late withdrawal,
is that just ignored when you're calculating GPA?
It's not ignored. So the transcript defines it. So if you've dropped a course after the time that you're allowed to drop a course, it's usually coded as a withdrawal fail, and it's treated as that. So it's a 0%. If you've just withdrawn when you're allowed to withdraw, then it's ignored. So and every school has different codes. Thankfully, we have OMSAS that is doing all of this for us, because it's pretty hard to keep up. But if your school has coded it as a fail, then it is a fail.
But McMaster codes it as a late withdrawal ever since COVID. So there's an LDW.
And
so
LDW, yeah, LDW is different. And I think that is ignored, as is withdraw.
Okay, all right, that's what I thought. But then this is where we had the question before that we were going back and forth on, was about the no credit. So a student had, for instance, a student went to another university and they wanted to take a course that they wanted to transfer, but then they wanted to drop it, but they actually wanted to put it on as no credit because McMaster gave them the permission to go to a different university to take a course. If they dropped it on the McMaster transcript, it would be listed as no credit.
Yeah, so, and I think I agree. I think we did go through this. It's very difficult for OMSAS because no credit means something very different at another school. So I do think they eventually determined that a no credit at McMaster is not the same as credit, no credit. When you're normally credit, no credit means pass fail. It's no different than a pass fail, and that's how it was treated. But now it's been changed. I feel bad for them trying to keep up with all of this because it just keeps changing at every school. So they do their best, but there are times when something isn't coded in the way they expect it to be. Students will, or applicants will always receive their calculation, and they have, I don't know what it is, 2 or 3 weeks to appeal it if it's incorrect through OMSAS.
Got you. And you were very, very helpful with that. I really appreciate your help because, I mean, we always want to provide accurate information, and I've already learned some bits and pieces. So let me just see, we're getting close to our time here. So we're getting asked a question: could the CARS score potentially make up for a mediocre GPA?
Well, it can. I mean, the CARS and the Casper and the GPA are all weighted exactly the same. So 2 out of 3, if you have one that's low, but your other 2 are very high, you may be able to offset it. But it's a moving target, and that's where it gets tricky. Each year, it's a new applicant pool. We're Z scoring, so we're taking the means of the entire applicant pool, and that's where it lies. So yes, in theory, yes. What we have found is that MCAT scores are going up. More students are getting an almost perfect score, and that wasn't something we saw in the past. GPAs, as you probably know, are going up. Casper is not changing much because it's looking at something quite different. But yes, I mean, I guess the bottom line is yes. It's just that I could never give you an example of what would offset the other because it is a moving target.
Yeah, I got you. And so just as a rule of thumb, I mean, is there a typical GPA bar for those students who are invited to interview? Is there like, can you give me a ballpark? Or
well, ballpark would really be what's on the stats, because our interview pool isn't very far off of what our offer pool is. There's not a great deal of difference. So unfortunately, you're looking at a pretty high number, definitely above 3.8. Not to say you cannot, because you can, but if you look at our statistics, you'll see there's quite a small number below that. And then the numbers, very high, between 3.8 and 3.9 is the vast majority of the students. So some of the students below that may have a PhD, they may have a perfect MCAT, they may have done extremely well on Casper, but those are the minority. So that's a handful of students as opposed to the vast majority.
Yeah, and that's one thing you did cover, was that there is a little GPA bump if you have a graduate degree. And I was otherwise engaged at that moment when you said that. I think you said 0.4 for a PhD.
Yeah, it's not a GPA bump though. It's separate in the formula. So Any students who have no graduate degree are actually only working out of a formula of 96%. Those with a graduate degree can receive 1% or 4%, but it's in a separate part of the formula. So it's not being added to their GPA, it's separate, which mathematically I understand is quite a different thing.
Yeah, U of T does it a little differently, but that's okay. That's helpful to know. All right, good, good. Let me just see, where are we? I'm just scrolling through. I think we've covered pretty much most things. As I said, I've answered a lot of the questions too. And just to reiterate to anybody who is in Faculty of Science here, through Oscar Plus, you can book appointments with us. We talk about this. We make sure we know people like Wendy who can steer us in the right direction, and at every school on these types of topics. If you're outside, if you're in health sciences, Student Success Center is your place to go. They have wonderful people there. They can help you there. Other faculties, humanities, business, arts and science. No, I think you have to go to Student Success, but business and humanities, you have your own career people who are well versed in these sorts of things too. So this is the place you check in so that you're not peppering Wendy with a gazillion questions all the time. People like myself and my colleague Hannah, who's here as well, we try to be as informed as possible so that we can save a lot of headaches for the people who are actually in the admissions management part of the school. So I think I've covered most of the things. So at this point in time in the chat, because I've been scrolling through, if you really have a burning question that you feel that Wendy hasn't covered or that I haven't asked, could you repeat it for me, because there's a lot of chat. And
our email is there as well. So
okay.
I have an assistant who does it constantly. Sometimes people don't want to ask the question necessarily, even in the public forum, which is perfectly fine.
Right. And some of the questions that I've answered are coming up again because, if you're not looking in the chat, right? So somebody had asked where the recordings are. We will send a link, but this will expire because, as we mentioned at the beginning, this information is only valid for this year. It may be the same next year, it may not. So that's why we need to make sure that this recording isn't distributed anywhere past this particular application year. Okay, so we have somebody not in the Faculty of Science. Do you recommend, if I'm not in the Faculty of Science, do you recommend I come to SCC or my faculty's office for med school questions? Humanities. So you've got lovely people in humanities. You have a career center there. So that's where you would go. And if they say, I don't know enough about medicine, then they're going to send you to Student Success. Student Success is available to all McMaster students. And they're, as I said, they're fabulous folks over there. We also in the science office have drop-in every day too. Oh yes, this is kind of a nice wrap-up question. So biggest piece of advice that you can give for applicants that maybe, just your own take on being intimately involved in selecting these students every year. What would be your biggest piece of advice?
Yeah, I mean, aside from sort of just the sheer level of competition and obviously ensuring that you have the highest statistics you can have, I think the other thing that we struggle with a lot is students knowing for sure that this is what they want for their career. Because I think what you see or what you hear, certainly what you see on television, is not at all what medicine is like. We don't require any sort of, volunteering in hospitals and that kind of thing, but it's not the worst idea if you're the least bit unsure of whether this is what you want. We sometimes have students who say to us, well, this wasn't actually what I always wanted, but I had the marks and my parents felt that I should, and this sort of thing. And that's a disaster, because I do think it reminds me a little bit of teaching. It's difficult to get in, and so it gets to be the goal as opposed to the calling, so to speak. And there's probably nothing worse than putting in all that effort and getting into something and finding that it isn't at all what you thought it was going to be. So I don't know if it's realistic to say that you can figure this out ahead of time, but I would definitely advise people to make sure that they have a little bit of an understanding of what it is and what the commitment is, because it's very big, and that it's something that they're truly going to love and be passionate about, because it's quite difficult to do, and it's expensive. So you just want to be really, really certain about that. That's not really advice other than probably what I would tell my kids, I suppose, but I think that's what I would suggest. It's quite disheartening, actually, when it's so competitive, to even admit one student that then wishes that this isn't what they got into.
Yeah. No, I see that. And we do try to contextualize it here as much as possible. Like, think of the big picture. Think of what, I mean, any job can be mundane and routine and repetitive. And you know, you're right. I love the way you said it, that this is not the way it looks on TV. Same with lawyers. It's we gather all our information from our TV professionals, and that is just not the way it is. And we try to you know, get students to think of this really truly and what it means to them and how does it utilize the skill sets they have. And I agree, trying something out, like, I mean, not that it's a deal breaker to have that sort of some kind of clinical or relationship development kind of role prior to this, but it does give you a chance to feel it out, you know. So yeah, thank you. I don't okay, Alina's asking us for a website for all the admission stats and requirements. Yeah, it's all there. You know, is there one particular place, Wendy? I mean, I just look at, you know, undergraduate medicine at Mac and I come up with everything I need.
This is so strange because it's they've changed the website. It used to just be mdprogram/mcmaster.ca, and I believe that will still take you there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and whenever I want the stats, for some reason, I always find that one hard to find. I just say admission stats for McMaster.
Yeah, I think it's it's where it's how we select.
and it comes right up. So I know most of you listening are way more clever than me and Wendy, and much more flexible and adaptable at finding out information out there. So I know you can do it. It's all there. I find it regularly. Yes, I believe that's it, Alina. Yeah. Okay, so Wendy, I can't thank you enough. This has been fabulous. I've learned some bits and pieces. You're a great resource. I love your openness and you're willing to really be, you know, fully disclose your processes. And I think that's great. I think our students that are attending today are really appreciative. So students, remember, check in with your career people, whomever those might be. I'm here for Faculty of Science, as is my colleague Hannah, who's also here sitting in today. But that's the best place to go if you have additional questions. Any parting words, Wendy?
I muted myself. No, not really. Just, I mean, best of luck to everyone that decides to pursue this. We too are here. You know, the email address was up there. So if you have questions, I mean, as Catherine alluded to, we do exactly as we say we do. So, you know, it's not a difficult process to follow, but if we haven't covered something that you want to know about, feel free to send an email along.
Yeah, it's okay to contact you
to the MD Admit email.
The MD Admit. Okay, got you. All right, perfect. That is great. It's really great to be able to have a place to send students where they can find there's so much information out there, and they depend on folks like you to curate it for them and give them the definitive word. And so do I. So and so do we. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, students, for coming. Thank you again, Wendy, and have a great rest of your summer. And a great start to your semester. Don't forget our Welcome Week stuff for Faculty of Science students. Okay, thank you, Wendy.
Bye.
Bye.